The oncologist's office smelled like antiseptic and other people's fear. I sat in the chair across from Dr. Patterson, watching her mouth move, knowing what she was about to say, before the words formed. 6 months, maybe 8 if the treatment goes well. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. I'm very sorry, Mr. Holloway. I was 68 years old, and I'd walked 23 blocks every day for 40 years. Rain, snow, heat that made the pavement shimmer, cold that turned my fingers numb even through gloves. 23 blocks, 6 days a week, delivering mail to the same houses, the same families, watching children grow into parents, watching parents grow old, watching the neighborhood change season by season, year by year, decade by decade. My body knew every crack in every sidewalk. My hands knew which mailbox lids stuck, which gates squeaked, which dogs barked but never bit. I knew who got their mail at exactly 2:15 every afternoon, waiting by the window. I knew who never checked their box for days. I knew more about the people on Harvey Street, Maple Avenue, and Oak Lane than most of them knew about each other, and I'd kept it all secret. Every observation, every small moment, every fragment of their lives that I'd witnessed. I'd written it down in journals I kept locked in my basement, 40 years of other people's stories, documented by a man who was never supposed to be more than a passing figure in a blue uniform. Dr. Patterson was still talking. Treatment options, hospice care, getting my affairs in order. I heard it all from somewhere far away, my mind already on those journals, 23 of them, one for each block of my route. 40 years of secrets. Do you have family, Mr. Holloway? Someone who can help you through this? I shook my head. Never married. No children. I have a sister in Phoenix, but we haven't spoken in years. Her expression softened with pity, and I almost laughed. She thought I was alone. She didn't understand that I'd been part of 100 families, that I'd watched over an entire neighborhood like a guardian no one knew they had. I'll be fine, I told her. I have some deliveries to make. That evening, I sat in my basement surrounded by the journals. They filled 2 entire shelves. Leather-bound books I'd purchased every year from the same stationery store downtown, each one labeled with street names and dates, each one filled with my small, careful handwriting. I pulled down the first one, dated February 1983, the month I'd started my route. My handwriting was younger then, more optimistic, the letters formed with the confidence of a man who thought he had all the time in the world. February 15th, 1983. Mrs. Chen at 412. Harvey Street was crying on her porch this morning. She tried to hide it when she saw me coming, wiping her face with her sleeve. I asked if she was all right, and she said her piano students had all quit. Said she wasn't a good enough teacher, that she was wasting their time and their parents' money. I told her I'd heard music coming from her house many times while doing my route, that it was beautiful, that it made the whole street feel more alive. She smiled a little. Tomorrow I'll mention it again. I'd forgotten that conversation. I'd forgotten so many of them. But as I read through the journals, it all came back. Mrs. Chen had kept teaching. I'd made a point of complimenting her students whenever I saw them practicing through the open windows. Small comments, nothing profound. That sounded lovely, or, you're getting better every week. By the end of that first summer, she had a waiting list of students. I turned pages, reading entries I'd written 30, 35, 40 years ago. Stories I'd witnessed, small kindnesses I'd done, problems I'd helped solve in ways so subtle that no one had ever known. March 3rd, 1985. The Rodriguez boy, Miguel, got rejected from State University today. Saw the thin envelope in the mail. Saw his mother's face when she opened it. The boy's brilliant. I've seen his report cards over the years. Later, I mentioned to Mrs. Henderson at 523 Maple that I knew a hard-working young man looking for part-time work if she still needed help at her law office. She hired him the next day. Yesterday, I saw a thick envelope from the university in Miguel's mail acceptance letter and scholarship information. Turns out Mrs. Henderson sits on the alumni board. She must have made a call. I'd done that dozens of times over the years, connecting people who needed help with people who could provide it, never taking credit, never expecting thanks, just making small adjustments to the flow of the neighborhood, like a gardener pruning branches so the light could reach where it was needed most. October 12, 1989. Emma Pritchard at 278 Oak Lane got another letter from California today. That makes 37 letters from the same address in the past year. She never sends anything back. I see her sometimes, standing at her mailbox, reading them with tears running down her face, then taking them inside. She's married to Frank Pritchard, the dentist. They seem happy enough. But those letters keep coming, and she keeps reading them, and she never writes back. I wonder what she gave up. I wonder if she regrets it. There were hundreds of entries like that. Thousands. Observations about people I'd served for decades, small interventions I'd made, connections I'd facilitated from the periphery. I had orchestrated the neighborhood like a silent conductor, ensuring that the music continued even when individual musicians failed, and now I had 6 months, maybe 8, to decide what to do with all these secrets. The next morning, I started walking my old route. I'd retired 2 years ago, handed my bag to a young woman named Sarah, who wore earbuds and carried the mail like it was just a job, not a calling. But my body still knew the way. My feet still found the familiar rhythm. Harvey Street looked the same. The oak trees were taller, their branches now meeting over the street to form a canopy of gold and amber leaves. The houses had new paint, new cars in the driveways, but the bones of the neighborhood were unchanged. 412 Harvey Street, Mrs. Chen's house. I stood on the sidewalk, looking at the porch where I'd found her crying 40 years ago. The piano music drifted through the open window, a student working through scales with patient precision. I walked up the steps and knocked. Mrs. Chen answered the door. She was in her 80s now, her hair white, her hands gnarled with arthritis, but her eyes were still bright and sharp. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression puzzled, and then recognition dawned. "Mr. Holloway? My goodness, I haven't seen you since you retired. Come in, come in." Her living room was exactly as I remembered. The grand piano dominated the space, surrounded by music stands and a wall of photographs showing decades of students. Some of those faces I recognized from my route, children who'd grown into adults, some of whom now lived on the same streets with children of their own. "I've thought about you often," Mrs. Chen said, settling into her chair. "You were always so kind, always had something nice to say about the music. I'm not sure I ever properly thanked you for that." I pulled the first journal from my bag, the one from 1983, and opened it to February 15th. "Mrs. Chen, I need to tell you something. May I read you something I wrote a long time ago?" I read her the entry about finding her crying, about her students quitting, about my small attempt to encourage her. She remained silent for a while after I was done, tears running down her grizzled cheeks. "I didn't know," she said in a low voice. "I thought those compliments were just small talk, politeness. I didn't know you meant them." "I meant every word," I said, "and I kept track. You've taught over 300 students in the past 40 years. I saw them coming and going, heard them practicing, watched them improve. You changed lives, Mrs. Chen. I just wanted you to know that someone was paying attention." She reached out and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm dying," I said simply. Cancer. 6 months, maybe less. And I have 40 years of stories like this, stories about people on my route, small moments I witnessed, small ways I tried to help. I kept them all secret because that's what a mailman is supposed to do. We're supposed to be invisible, professional, distant. But I couldn't help myself. I cared too much. Mrs. Chen was crying openly now. You gave me hope when I had none. That conversation on my porch. I'd been ready to quit teaching that day to sell the piano, give up the dream. And you said the music made the street feel more alive. Those words kept me going for 40 years. We sat together for over an hour. I read her additional entries, which included notes about the music that had influenced my days, observations about her students, and brief instances of beauty that I had captured on paper. When I finally left, she hugged me at the door, holding on longer than propriety demanded. Thank you, she offered. Thank you for seeing me. I was outside the Henderson residence at 523 Maple Avenue that afternoon. Mrs. Henderson had passed away 5 years ago. I'd attended the funeral, standing in the back where mailmen were supposed to stand. But her daughter Catherine still lived there, had inherited the house and her mother's law practice. Catherine answered the door in a business suit, briefcase in hand, clearly on her way out. She recognized me immediately. I'd delivered her mail since she was a child. Mr. Holloway, what a lovely surprise. I'm sorry, I'm just heading to court, but this will only take a moment, I said. It's about Miguel Rodriguez. Her expression shifted, softening. Miguel? I haven't thought about him in years. He was one of my mother's success stories. She helped him get into state, and he went on to become a doctor, I think pediatrician somewhere back east. Your mother hired him to work in her office when he was 18, I said. Did she ever tell you how that came about? She said he just showed up one day, asking about a job. Lucky timing, I guess. She'd been looking for help, and he was perfect. I pulled out the journal, turned to March 3rd, 1985, and handed it to her. It wasn't luck. It was me. I suggested Miguel to your mother because I'd seen his potential, seen his family struggling, known she was looking for help. I connected them. Catherine read the entry, her eyes widening. You orchestrated that? All those years ago? Your mother did the real work, I said. She saw his talent, made the call to the university, gave him opportunities, but I gave them the introduction. Small thing, really, but it mattered. Miguel saved my daughter's life, Catherine said softly. When Emma was 3, she had a respiratory crisis. We took her to the emergency room, and Miguel was the pediatrician on call. He diagnosed a rare condition the other doctors had missed. Emma's 17 now, healthy and thriving because Miguel knew what to look for. That struck me with the force of a physical blow. A casual introduction in 1985, a letter of recommendation from Mrs. Henderson, and 30 years later, a man became a doctor who saved a child's life. Ripples spreading out in ways I could never have predicted. Why are you telling me this? Catherine asked. Because I'm dying, and I wanted you to know small acts of kindness create chains of causation we can't imagine. Your mother changed Miguel's life. Miguel saved your daughter's life, and I was just a mailman who paid attention. I took a leisurely stroll to Emma Pritchard's residence at 278 Oak Lane. The sidewalk was covered in dancing shadows as the afternoon sun slanted through the oak trees. I'd walked this path 10,000 times, my bag heavy with other people's words, other people's stories. Emma's home had changed appearance. The garden was overgrown and the paint was faded. I could see boxes stacked in the living room through the window. Someone was moving. I knocked. The door opened, and there was Emma, with her silvered blonde hair and a face etched with years of grief and laughter. She must have been in her 70s by now. She didn't recognize me at first, and then her expression cleared. "Mr. Holloway, I thought you'd retired." "I did, but I'm making some final deliveries." I held up the journal. "Emma, I need to talk to you about the letters, the ones from California." Her face went pale. "How did you—" "I'm a mailman. I notice things." I opened the journal to October 12th, 1989. 37 letters that year, more in the years that followed. You read every one. You never wrote back. Tears came to Emma's eyes. "You kept track?" "I kept track of everything. May I come in?" With boxes of memories all around us, we sat in her partially furnished living room. Emma traced my handwriting with her finger as she gazed at the journal entry. "His name was David," she acknowledged at last. "We met in college. He wanted to be a musician, travel the world, live freely. I wanted security, stability. When he got offered a position with a symphony in California, he asked me to come with him. I said no. I chose Frank instead. Frank with his dental practice and his retirement plan and his steady, predictable life." "Did you love Frank?" I asked. "I loved the idea of Frank, the safety he represented. But David was my soulmate." The letters started a year after I married. He wrote every week for 30 years, every single week, telling me about his life, his music, his travels, never demanding a response, just letting me know he was still there. "Why didn't you write back?" "Because I was married, because it wouldn't have been fair to Frank, because I'd made my choice, and I thought I had to live with it." She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Frank died 6 months ago, and the letters stopped. David's last letter arrived the day after Frank's funeral. It said, 'I've loved you for 45 years. If you ever change your mind, I'm at the same address.'" I took another item out of my bag, this time from my pocket rather than my journal, an envelope that was postmarked 3 days ago and was addressed to Emma Pritchard. "This came to your old address," I said. "The new owners forwarded it to the post office. Sarah was going to return it to sender, but I took it. I thought maybe you'd want it delivered in person." Emma took the envelope with shaking hands. The return address was in California. She opened it carefully, unfolding a single sheet of paper. "Emma, I'm 80 years old now. This will be my final letter because my fingers aren't working as well as they once did. For 45 years, I have written to you once a week, never asking for anything in return, just wanting you to know that you were loved. You were loved forever. I'm not depressed. I got to spend my life making music and thinking of you. That was enough. But if, by some miracle, you're free now and you're reading this and you remember a boy who once asked you to run away with him, I'm still at the same address. I remain here. I'll be here forever. All my love, David." Emma looked up at me, her face transformed. "He's still there. After all these years, he's still waiting." "Then maybe it's time to write back," I said gently. She laughed through her tears. "I'm packing to move anyway. I was going to my daughter's house in Oregon, but—" She looked at the letter again. "But maybe California would be better." I left her there, already searching for writing paper, already composing a response to a man who'd waited a lifetime. Something changed in my chest as I went down her steps. Not pain, but a sense of justice. This was what I'd been saving these stories for. The final delivery that mattered was this one. The weeks flew by. As I went through the journals, I stopped by the homes I had worked at for decades and told stories to people who had no idea I was looking or how much I cared. I told the Johnson family about the day their son almost drowned, and how, before anyone else knew what had happened, I had called 911 from the neighbor's phone. The boy was 35 now, a father himself, and he cried when I showed him the journal entry describing how I'd run faster than I thought possible. My mailbag bouncing against my side, I told Carlos Mendez about all the times I'd accidentally left packages on his doorstep. Packages I'd purchased myself when I knew his family was struggling. Christmas presents signed from a friend, groceries left without a name, and school supplies that showed up when his daughter went off to college. He'd thought they were from a church charity. They had been carefully budgeted over years, starting from a modest salary as a mailman. I told Sarah Chung about the letters her mother had written to her but never sent. Letters I'd found in the mail by mistake when her mother died. Letters I'd kept safe, waiting for the right time. While reading them in my living room, Sarah discovered things about her mother that she had never known and came to terms with forgiveness that she had never believed was possible. Each story was a thread, and together they formed a tapestry I'd been weaving for 40 years. A neighborhood kept together by a man who was supposed to be invisible, a pattern of small acts of kindness and quiet interventions. But there was one story I hadn't told yet. There was one house I hadn't been to. One journal entry I'd read 100 times, but never had the courage to share. 465 Oak Lane, the Morrison residence. I stood outside on a Tuesday afternoon, the autumn light fading to gold. The house appeared worn out from years of neglected upkeep. In the driveway sat an old sedan, and through the window I could see a woman moving slowly through the rooms. I'd avoided this house for a reason. This story was different. This story was mine. I knocked. The woman who answered was in her late 40s, careworn but with kind eyes. She didn't recognize me. She'd only lived on my route for the last 5 years before I retired. "Mrs. Morrison? I'm Robert Holloway. I used to be the mailman for this neighborhood. I have something I need to tell you about your husband." Her expression clouded. "My husband passed away 3 years ago. I'm sorry, but if this is about old bills or—" "No," I said quickly. "Nothing like that. May I come in? It's about something that happened 20 years ago. Something I've kept secret for far too long." We sat in her living room, and I pulled out the journal, opening it to a date I'd memorized long ago, June 15th, 2003. "Your husband was James Morrison. He worked construction, union carpenter. Good man by all accounts. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. You struggled financially but always paid your bills on time." Mrs. Morrison nodded slowly. "Yes, James was a good provider. We never had much, but we had enough. 20 years ago, James had an accident on a job site. Fell from scaffolding, broke his back. He was out of work for 8 months. I remember," she said quietly. "Worst year of our lives. We nearly lost the house, nearly lost everything." I turned the journal so she could see the entry. "During those 8 months, you received anonymous payments, money orders arriving in the mail, always exactly enough to cover your mortgage payment. You never knew where they came from." Her eyes widened. "That was you? That was me. I'd been saving for years, never had much use for money. No family to support, no expensive hobbies. I ate simply, lived modestly, and watched my savings grow. When James fell, I knew you were in trouble. I saw the shut-off notices from the utility companies, the foreclosure warnings from the bank. So, I helped." Mrs. Morrison was crying now. "You saved our house. You saved our family. Those 8 months, if we'd lost the house, James would have given up. He was so depressed, so scared. But as long as we had the house, he had something to fight for. He went to physical therapy, got better, went back to work. We stayed together because of those payments. There's more," I said, turning to another entry. "Your daughter, Rebecca. She wanted to go to art school, but you couldn't afford it. In 2008, she received a scholarship, the Neighborhood Excellence Scholarship. Do you remember? Of course, it was a miracle. We'd never heard of that scholarship before, and we never met anyone else who received it. Because it didn't exist, I created it. I'd been investing my savings, and by 2008, I had enough to fund 4 years of art school for one student. I set up the scholarship through an anonymous foundation, made it look official, and arranged for Rebecca to receive it. She deserved it. I'd seen her drawings over the years, accidentally glimpsed through windows, noticed the talent she was trying to develop despite having no resources. Mrs. Morrison stood up, walked to the mantel, and picked up a photograph. A young woman in a graduation gown, smiling radiantly. She graduated top of her class. She's an illustrator now for children's books. She makes a good living doing what she loves. I know, I said softly. I've bought every book she's illustrated. I have them at home. Why? Mrs. Morrison asked, turning to face me. Why did you do all this? We were nothing to you, just people on your route. That's where you're wrong, I said. You were everything to me, all of you, every family on every street. I never had children of my own, never built a traditional family, but I had my route. I had 23 blocks of people I cared about, watched over, tried to help in whatever small ways I could. You weren't strangers. You were my purpose. We talked for 2 hours. I told her about other families I'd helped, other small interventions I'd made. I told her about the journals, about the 40 years of observations and quiet kindnesses. And I told her about the cancer, about the 6 months I had left, about this final route I was walking to return the stories to their owners. When I finally left, Mrs. Morrison walked me to the door and hugged me tightly. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for caring. As I walked away from 465 Oak Lane, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The weight I'd been carrying, the secret of those anonymous payments, the hidden scholarship, all the quiet ways I'd helped people without letting them know, that weight was lifting. The autumn evening was cool and crisp. The neighborhood was settling into dinner time, lights coming on in windows, the smell of cooking drifting from houses I'd served for decades. I knew every family, every story, every secret hope and hidden struggle. And now, finally, they knew me too. The next weeks were harder. The cancer was progressing faster than Dr. Patterson had predicted. There were days I couldn't get out of bed, days when the pain medication made the world fuzzy and distant. But I kept going. I had more deliveries to make. I visited Thomas Chen, Mrs. Chen's grandson, who'd become a concert pianist. I told him about watching his grandmother teach him when he was 5, about the journal entries documenting his progress, about my certainty even then that he'd be special. He wept and insisted on playing for me. A private concert in his apartment, just him and an old mailman who'd believed in him before he believed in himself. I visited Maria Rodriguez, Miguel's sister, who'd become a teacher. I told her about the day I'd convinced the principal of Lincoln Elementary to interview her, how I'd talked her up as a candidate, how I'd seen her patience with neighborhood children and known she'd be extraordinary in the classroom. She'd been teaching for 25 years now, had shaped hundreds of young minds, and she'd never known that her first job came because a mailman had made a phone call. I went to see David Chen, who had been a disturbed adolescent when I knew him and had no connection to Mrs. Chen, despite having the same last name I told him about the day I'd found him sitting on a curb, high and despairing. And instead of calling the police, I'd called his parents and waited with him until they came. I'd checked on him regularly after that, always with a kind word, always with the assumption that he'd figure things out. He claimed that I was the first person to treat him as though he was deserving of being saved. He had been sober for 15 years and worked as a counselor assisting other addicts. Every story was a present I was returning. Each conversation was a thread in the tapestry being revealed. People were starting to talk to each other, comparing their experiences, realizing that the quiet mailman had touched all their lives in ways they'd never imagined. Someone organized a gathering, a neighborhood potluck in the community park, scheduled for a Saturday in late October. Everyone was invited. Everyone showed up. I arrived weak and thin, the cancer eating away at me faster now. I'd lost 30 pounds in 6 weeks. My skin had a gray cast that no amount of sunlight could warm. But I was determined to make this final delivery. The park was filled with people I'd served for 40 years, families spanning 3 generations, all connected by the routes I'd walked, the mail I'd delivered, the small kindnesses I'd offered. Someone had set up a microphone. Someone else had made a banner. Thank you, Mr. Holloway. 3 generations of Mrs. Chen's family were present. The Rodriguez family had flown in from Boston. Miguel the doctor, Maria the teacher, their parents now elderly but still vibrant. Emma Pritchard had come, her hand held by an elderly man with kind eyes. David, the musician who'd waited 45 years, they'd gotten married 3 weeks ago. Catherine Henderson stood with her daughter, Emma, the girl whose life Miguel had saved. Sarah Chung had brought her children and the letters from her mother. The Morrison family was there. Mrs. Morrison with Rebecca, the illustrator, and Rebecca's children, hundreds of people, hundreds of stories, all connected by a man who'd simply paid attention. They asked me to speak. I stood at the microphone, gripping the stand for support, and looked out at the faces of my neighborhood, my family, my life's work. I was just a mailman, I began. That's what I told myself for 40 years. Just a mailman, nothing special. But I was wrong. My voice was weak, but the crowd was silent, leaning in to hear. Every day I walked 23 blocks. Every day I delivered your mail, noticed your lives, witnessed your struggles and triumphs, and every day I wrote it down. Not because I wanted to invade your privacy, but because I couldn't help caring. I couldn't help seeing you, really seeing you, in a world that often makes us invisible to each other. I paused, gathering strength. I never married, never had children of my own. For years I thought that meant I'd lived a small life, an insignificant life. But standing here now, looking at all of you, I realize I was wrong. My life wasn't small. It was vast. Every one of you became my family. Every story I witnessed became part of my story. Mrs. Chen was crying. So was Emma. So was Mrs. Morrison. So, it seemed, was half the crowd. I'm dying, I said simply. Cancer. I have maybe a month left, maybe less. But before I go, I needed you to know, I needed you to understand that you were seen. You were loved. You mattered to someone even when you thought you were alone. I pulled out one final journal, the one I'd started last month. This is my last journal. In it, I've written what each of you meant to me, Mrs. Chen. You taught me that encouragement can save a life. Miguel, you taught me that one introduction can change the world. Emma, you taught me that it's never too late for love. Mrs. Morrison, you taught me that anonymous kindness can sustain a family through the darkest times. I looked around at all the faces, all the stories. We live in a world that tells us we're separate, that our lives don't touch, that what we do doesn't matter if it's not big and loud and recognized, but that's a lie. Everything we do matters. Every kindness echoes. Every moment of attention given to another person creates ripples we can't imagine. My strength was diminishing, and my legs were now trembling. Marcus Rodriguez, Miguel's father, stepped forward and steadied me. Others surrounded me, cheering me on. I was just a mailman, I repeated, my voice now hardly audible. But I was your mailman, and that made all the difference. The audience erupted in cheers. People were standing, sobbing, and grabbing at one another. I noticed neighbors who had lived next to each other for years, but had never really interacted, now hugging and sharing stories, and realizing that the same silent protector had touched them all. I was assisted to a chair. Water was brought by someone. Mrs. Chen held my hand as she sat next to me. David and Emma sat across from me. Everyone in the Morrison family gathered one by one. People came forward to share their own memories, their own stories of small kindnesses received. "You left a box of oranges on our porch every week the winter I had pneumonia," someone said. "You taught my son to tie his shoes on our front steps," another person shared. "You called the fire department when you smelled gas at our house before we even knew there was a leak. You found my wedding ring in the street and returned it without telling me you'd spent 2 hours searching." Story after story after story, a lifetime of small moments that added up to something enormous. A web of goodwill so delicately woven that up until now, no one had noticed the pattern. As the sun set over the park, casting long shadows through the oak trees, I realized something. I hadn't been invisible at all. I had been doing what I was supposed to do, and in the right place. The world hadn't needed me to be loud or famous or powerful. It had required me to be attentive, concerned, and to consistently and empathetically show up every day. When I got home that evening, I made one last entry in my journal. October 23rd, 2023. The neighborhood gathered today to say goodbye. I thought I'd been giving them something all these years, but I was wrong. They gave me everything. They gave me purpose. I have family because of them. They gave me a life that mattered. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not depressed. I got to spend 40 years walking the same 23 blocks, and that was enough. That was more than enough. Tomorrow I'll probably be too weak to leave the house. But that's okay. My route is complete. Every delivery has been made. Every story has been returned to its owner. What remains when we're gone? I used to wonder about that. Now I know. Love remains. Attention remains. The ripples of kindness we create continue spreading long after we're gone. I was just a mailman. But I was seen. I was cherished. I mattered. That was sufficient. I had 3 more weeks to live. I was never alone because the neighborhood took turns staying with me. Mrs. Chen was in my living room playing the piano. Over the years, I've delivered books to Emma and David, who read them to me. Miguel held my hand while checking my painkillers. Mrs. Morrison sat with me in pleasant silence and brought food. Rebecca sketched the neighborhood, showing the streets I had spent 4 decades walking. On November 12th, on a clear, cold morning, I took my last breath. People I had served, people who loved me, and people who had become my family were all around me. My last thought was of the journals, of all the stories I'd witnessed and kept safe, now returned to their owners. The community park served as the venue for the funeral. There were more than 500 people present. In my honor, they planted an oak tree and put a bench next to it with a plaque that said, Robert Holloway, 1955 to 2023. He delivered more than mail. He delivered hope, witnessed life, and taught us that small acts of kindness create the world we want to live in. The pupils of Mrs. Chen performed music. Emma read a poem David had written. People were moved to tears and laughter by Miguel's eulogy. Rebecca made an illustrated book about my life, which was distributed for free to everyone in the neighborhood. It depicts a mailman going about his daily business over 40 years of different seasons, always present, always caring, and always watching. They found something I had set up after I left. Every family I'd helped received a letter, delivered posthumously, from the same anonymous foundation that had given Rebecca her scholarship. Inside was a check and a note. This money represents what I didn't spend on myself over 40 years. I led a modest life in order to assist others. I want you all to use this to help someone else now that I'm gone. Give back to others. Keep the kindness going. Make your own ripples. My life had purpose because of you. Let me give you this final gift. Depending on need, the checks were different. Some were small, some large, but they were all accompanied by the same directive. Never disclose its source and use it to benefit someone else. Like I had done, keep the generosity anonymous. The neighborhood established a custom a year after my passing. They have a kindness day every October 23rd, which is the anniversary of that get-together in the park, where people tell tales of good things they have done or seen. Youngsters are taught about the attentive mailman. The quiet guardian who shaped their community for 4 decades is told to newcomers. My journals were given to the local library, sealed for 10 years to preserve privacy, and then made available to scholars who are interested in the effects of persistent small acts of kindness and community building. My story was incorporated into community organizing models, social science research, and academic studies. More significantly, though, my story became ingrained in the neighborhood's culture. After hearing what I had seen, heard, and documented, people's perceptions of one another changed. They came to understand how much people had noticed them, how their hardships and victories had meant something to someone who never sought praise. They began to see each other the way I had, carefully, attentively, and with the knowledge that every life is a tale worth telling. In my honor, the Rodriguez family created a scholarship for first-generation college attendees. Mrs. Chen developed a music program for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. David and Emma made a donation to literacy initiatives. Catherine Henderson provided funding for needy families to receive legal assistance. The individuals I had assisted, one by one, discovered methods to spread the goodwill and start fresh waves. And the community thrived. Crime fell. Participation in the community grew. In small and large ways, people loved one another, supported one another, and looked out for one another. They understood what I had been trying to teach them for 40 years, that we are not separate, that the smallest gesture can have a lasting impact, and that our lives influence and mold one another in innumerable invisible ways. I worked as a mailman. I delivered bills, packages, and letters. For 40 years, I walked 23 blocks every day. I never accomplished anything noteworthy or well-known. I never made headlines by changing the world. However, I altered my world. I had an impact on people's lives. When it was most necessary, I paid attention. For decades, I consistently and silently showed up, and that was sufficient in the end. That was more than sufficient. That was all. Despite the fact that I never met Mr. Holloway, I occasionally consider his story. 5 years after his passing, I moved to the area and purchased a home on Harvey Street, 3 doors down from Mrs. Chen's former residence. She taught piano until the end of her life and died last year at the age of 92. When my daughter saw the oak tree in the park on my first day in the neighborhood, she inquired about the plaque. A senior citizen, Mrs. Morrison, told her the story. My daughter asked me that evening if I believed that anyone was as interested in us as Mr. Holloway had been in his neighborhood. I was unsure of how to respond. Did anyone pay attention in our contemporary world of doorbell cameras, package deliveries devoid of human interaction, email and text messages in place of handwritten letters, and loneliness masquerading as connection? But then I became aware of something. Within a week, Sarah, our new mail carrier, was able to learn our names. The way she stopped to pet our dog, inquired about my daughter's science project, and mentioned that she hadn't seen the elderly man across the street pick up her mail in a few days. Little things. Minor details. Though perhaps not as organized as Mr. Holloway's journals, they are still there. Each of us has the ability to observe the lives of others. Each of us has the ability to spread kindness. Journals, specialized training, or ideal conditions are not necessary. All we have to do is show up, listen, and care enough to take action when it's necessary. Mr. Holloway was merely a postal worker. However, he taught a whole neighborhood that just anything can become extraordinary when done with love, care, and consistency. These days, whenever I check my mail, I think of him. I wonder what Sarah sees, what small acts of kindness she gives, and what stories she might share if she kept journals like Mr. Holloway did. Every time I see her going about her daily business, I also make an effort to focus more on myself. To the old woman who takes her dog for a morning walk at the same time every day. To the teen who spends his after-school hours sitting by himself on the park bench. To the young mother pushing her stroller past my house who appears to be exhausted, and I don't write in a journal. However, I try to be present. I make an effort to care. I make an effort to spread kindness in my tiny, inconsequential way, because we learned from Mr. Holloway that there are no trivial ways to love the world. No small gestures of kindness are allowed. Every gesture counts. Every attentional moment produces something enduring. He delivered more than just mail as a mailman, walking 23 blocks, and everything changed as a result.